River and the Lillekwaunee people of the far south. We recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. This evening I'd like to take a minute to sadly acknowledge two recent incidents that have occurred in the Orne Valley, being the incident at the Grove intersection and also of the washing up of fish material on Verona Sands Beach. These events have understandably caused distress within our community. We know that many are feeling saddened, worried and in some cases anger. Please know that we share in your concerns and our hearts go out to those directly affected. We recognise how important these issues are to our community and we expect that many of you here tonight will be seeking answers and reassurance. As we come together in this formal council meeting, it is important to remember that the councillors and officers are also part of this community. We ask for your understanding and respect so that everyone has the opportunity to ask their question, hear responses and allow the council work to continue productively. Thank you for being here and for your care and concern for our shared community. Tonight we have in attendance Councillor Deputy Mayor Thorpe, Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Jessup, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Burgess and Councillor Rozek. Can you please introduce your staff?
Burgess, you did.
Oh, did I say Councillor?
Yeah, you did.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Staff here tonight. We have General Counsel Matthew Grimsey, Director People and Corporate Patty Johnson, Director Community and Place Lyle Ground, Director Infrastructure and Assets Frank Chen, and our support staff, Innovation and Technology Project Officer Connor Watson, Digital Platforms Officer Sheridan Kuzlin and Executive Assistant Olga Bath.
Thank you. Tonight we have apologies from Paul Gibson and we have David O'Neill on a leave of absence. We have no absent tonight. Councillors, do we have anyone wishing to declare an interest in any of tonight's agenda items? No. Thank you. 4.002/25. Do I have a councillor to move a motion that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of Council 29th of January 2025 as circulated be confirmed? Councillor Rozek and Councillor Armstrong. Do any councillors wish to report any changes to those reports? Minutes? No? Okay, well I'll put all those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Do we have any legislative items tonight?
Not tonight.
Do we have any urgent matters?
No.
Public question time. I don't have any mayor's announcements tonight. Public question time. Questions taken on notice. There was no questions taken on notice at January's council meeting. Questions given on notice. There was 4 questions given on notice, 2 from Irene Swan and 2 from Mr. Jeffrey Swan, either regarding the Port Children Sports Centre and the Cygnet Wombat Crossing project, and the responses are on our website and included in the minutes. Questions was out without notice. There was 12 questions emailed in for tonight's meeting from Anna Cadden, David Mason, Mark Keating, Susan Armstrong, Peter Shanks, Miriam Alou, Anna Hopwood, Barbara Mitchell, Christine Farmer, Jen Cuthbert and Marcy Breen regarding the recent salmon deaths resulting in pollution washing up on Verona Beach. And we have 1 question emailed in for tonight's meeting from Michelle Chandler regarding the proposed Grove intersection upgrade. Additionally, we have received many public inquiries regarding this as well. Responses are available on the website and will be included in the minutes. So public question time. Welcome to that section now. If you have a question as a chair, I'll ask you to come forward to the lectern and identify yourself by name and area and where you live. To make things fair and equitable, we will limit to 2 questions per person. We normally allocate 15 minutes, but we will allow for questions. Tonight, all questions must be directed to me as the chair. Either I will answer the question or refer the question to the General Manager. Every attempt will be made to provide an answer to your question. Debate on questions cannot be entered into. The Council cannot make decisions on issues that arise in public question time. And if we have a group of questions concerning either the Grove intersection or Verona Sands, we could do them all at one after the other, so they're not reverting back to it all the time. So if anyone would like to ask a question? Yes, thank you. If you'd like to come forward.
Okay. I was interested to read about the meetings between
Can we say just your name and where you're from?
Oh,
It's for the record.
Sorry,
Yep.
Jenny Campbell-Smith, Crabtree. Apologies. I was interested to read about the meetings between Council and the Forest Practices Authority about the use of forest practices plans for clearing on private land, and I'm thankful to Council for following this up. FPA has put out a reminder to its community about not writing retrospective FPPs. However, did they give any indication of when they will be reminding FPOs, Forest Practices Officers, of their duty to abide by LUPA, the Land Use and Planning Activities Act, and not write FPPs, I'm sorry about all the jargon, for vegetation clearing without first agreeing with the landholder that the clearing is not for a building or associated development? I'm interested as the FPA's approach to this issue thus far seems to have been somewhat inadequate, given that the State Planning Office clearly supports a higher duty of care for FPOs.
Thank you. No problems. I'll pass that one.
Yep. So as it states in the report, there's still work underway to prepare and deliver more public education in this space. The information that we've got available is already in that report, and I'm not going to venture further comment at this point until we've completed the work with the FPA.
I have a second one on a similar subject. Should I do that now?
Okay, please.
Will Council implement a process for the recording of notices of intent to harvest such that they can be matched against existing and subsequent DAs to ensure compliance with LUPA, difficult as that may be?
Do I put that?
That's something we're already working on, so yeah, we'll be doing that.
Lovely. Thank you.
No problems. Thank you. Yes, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Jerry White Craddock. A couple of questions. The first one is to do with council facility online booking arrangements. A series of challenges have been experienced by both council officers and consumers with the new booking system run by Space2Co. Since its initial inception in November 24, it has been a source of frustration, confusion, and time-consuming for officers and end users. Even after deleting a series of emails, I still have 30 from Space2Co in my inbox, from various interactions around payment and non-payment, public liability policy statements, and transferring bookings once from the hub to the town hall. Prior to the engagement of Space2Co, booking council facilities seldom required more than one phone call. Questions. Is it envisaged that the contract with Space2Co will continue? If it is to continue, how are the problems with Space2Co being addressed for satisfactory resolution for staff and end users?
Thank you.
Yeah, so look, Space2Co is obviously a new facility that we're trialling and piloting that before we roll it out wider. There are some bumps that we've been made aware of by the public. We're confident that we can iron those out and improve that experience. It's used to good effect by other councils and other facilities around Australia. So we're confident we can get that ironed out. And I just encourage anyone that is having problems with it to pass that through to our officers so that we can continually improve it.
Yeah, the officers have been very good and very helpful. Yeah. The second question is about the transport workshop. Not a new subject for me. At the June 24 council meeting, I asked a question related to council holding a transport workshop. In the response, mention was made of council's restructure and there being other priorities. But I was advised that council will come back to circular economy Huon with a timeline. So the question is, where is transport on the priority list now? When do you envisage coming back to us with a time frame?
I can take that as well. Can't give you a time frame of when we'll come back to you, but I can tell you that we're putting our workshop proposed agenda to councillors because there are multiple issues of appetite for council engagement, community engagement. So that has taken some time to develop so that it can actually be meaningful engagement and discussions with the community about how we affect change as opposed to just a log of issues, I suppose, is what we're trying to prosecute. So that is going to councillors in the next couple of weeks. I'm looking at you guys soon, and we'll be then back out to yourself and the wider community to start publicising what those engagements look like.
Thank you. I'm not allowed to ask another question, but is transport on the list?
Is transport on the list as
to be
a
distributed?
as a singular topic? Transport is not currently on our recommended list. No.
Around it?
It's an issue of, so we'll provide more information about the direction we're taking, but transport is a function of the places in which we live, and it's part of what makes it a livable place. So we want each of those workshops become place-based workshops around what is most important to the community. So where the preferred path for us is to go down, whilst we have some individual topic workshops, the majority of our workshops will be around placemaking as a whole, and transport is obviously a key component of that, but not a singular topic we're recommending at the moment, simply because of the priorities that we've got in front of us.
And part of the community vision.
Of course, yeah, but now the general discussing place is all about, these are all the things that are included in a community vision, and given that council's role is in seeking balance between all these competing priorities, hence when we consult and engage, we need to consider all those competing priorities. Otherwise, we can go down single interest pathways and set expectations that aren't necessarily manageable and in isolation from all the other competing priorities that we've got.
Thank you.
Do I have any other questions? Yes, you may.
So my name's Ellie Pipos and I'm from Mountain River. And I had here, given the incident that happened at the Grove intersection on Monday afternoon, will the council ensure immediate action for pedestrian safety, and will it be prioritised? If so, what would this look like?
Look, firstly, to reiterate what the Mayor said earlier, it's, we're as sad as the rest of the community and incredibly troubled by this. We have this afternoon, you may not have had a chance to see it yet, but we have published what we have been doing about it, and it absolutely is a priority for this council. It's a shared problem. It's a State Growth road, but it's in our area, and we have been working with State Growth for a very long time. It's a long-term good fix, a thorough fix for that is a significant issue and a significant cost, hence the time being taken. We share the frustration in how long that is being taken. Immediate action is difficult to take and needs really careful consideration. It feels like the right thing to walk out there and reduce speed limits and things like that. They need to be done carefully. It's a change in a road environment. There's very good research around providing notice and all that kind of stuff so that people don't just suddenly have a significant change put in front of them. But we will be, and already are, working with State Growth around what, if there are temporary actions or immediate actions that can be taken, and obviously trying to prioritise those, while also, and doing it as quickly as possible, while also continuing on the main game, which is where we already were, and where funding has already been allocated to provide some kind of long-term permanent fix.
What would those steps look like?
what will the steps look like?
Yeah, what were the things that would be put in place by?
Oh, what could
Council.
potentially be done
Yes,
as a temporary?
yes.
Yeah, so look, if you're talking temporary, and it's an incredibly, I can't be categoric in what could potentially be done, but you're pretty well limited to things like speed limit reduction if you were going to make a temporary and short-term fix. And then around that is what is the lead notice? How do you provide, billboards, etc., to make drivers aware of it? So anything temporary short term is pretty limited in scope of what we can do, just given it is a highway environment, and if there were easy fixes, they would have been done already.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions concerning the highway? Yes.
Liz Smith, Signet. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the Signet Town Hall report. Thank you for that report. And it was interesting to see the ideas that have been put forward. It was clear that there's no prima facie evidence that the lease of the land is not in the public interest, which is a really good outcome. And I'm hoping that the suggestions will be seriously considered. The report seems very comprehensive, and the recognition that the council has not undertaken any particular maintenance, upgrade or simple update works on the front office is a good admission. And it was also good to see that the needs of the Signet Town Hall will be considered in budget allocations. Jerry's already referred to the system for enabling community use of the hub in Huonville, and the hub does seem to work very well, apart perhaps from this computer-based booking system, and I haven't had anything to do with that because I don't know how to do computer-based booking systems. And I guess that members of the public, such as Jerry and staff, may have reported that the service is not working well, and what is going to be done to upgrade that service, and what kind of time frame will that be?
So is that the question about Space to Code?
That's a bit, yes.
I'll take that on notice, and I think those directly involved are going to see the changes there anyway. But we can come back to you about what else we can do at next council meeting, because I just don't know exactly the scope of what needs to be done and the scope of what we can change, and whether there's a education component to it to actually help some of the routine bookers to collaborate with us, understand more, get educated on using that tool, or if it's simply just tool upgrades and changes we need to make.
Right, and perhaps not very computer literate people, there might be a better way.
It's got to cater to everyone. I mean, and a key part of it, and the changes that we talk about in the Signet Town Hall report, is around maximising activation of these halls and maximising diversity of the use. So the booking system needs to support everyone. And we're coming from a position where, whilst, and I fully appreciate that it may not have felt, Jerry's question before or comment was that it was, you never had more than one email backwards and forwards to make a booking. That may have been your experience, and that's great to hear, but it certainly wasn't the experience of everyone. And it certainly was a lot of staff time. And so we are trying to be, rationalise our costs, provide fair, equitable access. And ultimately, there are lots of really good advantages as well that haven't yet been realised when we start to populate the calendar view, so you can actually just get in there without having to have lengthy interactions. You can actually just see what's available, etc. So it's
just click on a box or something like that.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think any change is difficult. We haven't got this one perfect yet, but I'm confident that we can get it better, and we'll aim for perfect. But you guys can be the judge of that.
Thank you. And I just sorry.
Just let you know that Space to Code, we have the Huonville Town Hall online already. So you're all welcome to actually get into Space to Code and look around. Any suggestions, recommendations that can help us to improve and make the user more easier to book our facility.
That's the Huonville Town Hall.
Thank
Right, thank you.
Actually, that's not quite accurate, because to be able to book the town hall, somebody must say you can book the town hall. So my understanding is that you can be approved for booking a facility like the Huonville Hub, but that doesn't mean, and it hasn't meant with the last time we booked the hall, that you can then book another hall, which is also run by council.
That's all the things we try to iron out and make it more streamlined, and those
That'd
are
be
comments
great.
we need.
That would be good, yes.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to raise is that when I went through the agenda and looked at the attachments for the submissions on the EOI for the Cygnet Town Hall, I couldn't find my one. I didn't get acknowledgement till about 3 weeks after, and I just wondered whether, I've actually forwarded it on this afternoon, asked that it be forwarded to all councillors, and I just wondered if you could check that all the other submissions on the EOI did come and are in the report.
Yeah,
Just give us a minute.
I remember reading your submission,
Yeah.
but I can't remember if I.
Well, I
if
put
it-
in
if
one,
it
I
went
think
in,
I
yeah.
put in one on behalf of the museum,
You
as
did,
president of
yeah.
the museum,
Yeah.
but I also put
No, you had a
in one
personal
on
one
my
as well.
own
Yeah,
park,
yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
With legal PA. I
Oh.
haven't seen those.
Huh, okay.
Okay, well, I've sent it on this afternoon asking that it be forwarded to all councillors.
Okay.
That come in this afternoon?
It hasn't come through me.
Yeah.
But I got a reply from Michelle Churchill, so I don't know. It got lost somewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say it's
Anyway,
in the wrong area.
just be
Yeah.
good to check that there weren't any others that got lost in a similar way.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And apologies that that's not in there.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Does anyone, any other questions? Yes?
Luke Smith, Crabtree. And also regarding the Grove intersection, just curious how much money Minister Betts has committed to Grove, plus the timeline for the implementation of any improvements of the intersection.
So the state government at the last state election committed $3 million specifically to the Grove intersection. Additionally to that, the state government successfully received $40 million from the federal government to fund the wider Huon Highway Corridor study, which is largely focused on safety improvements along the length of the road. As yet, and we've been, in our work with DSG, have been seeking to collaborate with them, and key to what we're asking for is exactly the timelines and what projects specifically are going to be delivered through this and when, so that we can, for the primary aim of having a say in it, helping to prioritise it, and ultimately communicating it to the public so that they can have an expectation of when these critical safety issues are going to be addressed. But right now, we don't yet have that, and that's the key focus of what we're doing at the moment on those key programs.
And the Huon corridor runs from,
It's from Kingston all the way to Southport.
that's the length of the,
Yep.
of the corridor.
But distinct, yeah. $3 million was directly allocated to Grove
Grove.
intersection.
Okay. I also had another question as well, I guess, regarding temporary or permanent even improvements to that intersection. Can signs be put up on either end of that intersection saying children crossing from 3 to 5 p.m. or from like 8 to 9 a.m. on Monday to Friday? And what is the process for that kind of thing to be implemented, I guess?
Yeah, look, the road authority can consider signage, speed reductions, speed bumps, all sorts of things. But noting it's a 100-kilometre-an-hour zone, and unless the speed limit is changed, it's ultimately the speed there. So signs may change driver attention, but this is where we need to look at what benefit, what real risk reduction would be achieved by any changes that need to be made, and ultimately in that environment, you need to do some take some really quite meaningful changes to have a real risk reduction.
Impact, yeah.
Yeah.
And the minister did.
But
make
sorry,
it?
just to
Yeah.
say, we obviously are exploring every possible avenue to do that.
Totally.
And they did state that they will be coming to us in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Considering,
Well, that's on the stuff that was already in train.
Yeah, that's right.
And then now that we've had an incident like this, it's a separate discussion around what kind of shorter term immediate issues fixes could we consider.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
and that might, as you say, they might change their, who knows, like, we'll have to wait and see.
It's being explored, and it is also going to be influenced by what the police investigation finds to determine, what would be an impactful fix.
Do I have any other questions from the gallery? Okay, thank you very much for those. 8.2, do we have any deputations?
No.
Petitions?
We have one tonight on Cygnet Town Hall. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for coming. So this is a petition regarding renewal of lease for the Cygnet Community Hub in the Cygnet Town Hall. The petition is stated to contain 281 signatories and complies with the requirements of Section 57(2) of the Local Government Act 1993.
Okay, so you want to
Document if you want. Yep. That the petition regarding renewal of the lease for the Cygnet Community Hub in the Cygnet Town Hall lodged with Council 7 February 2025 be received.
So do I refer the councillors to that recommendation? Do I have a councillor to move the motion? Councillor Thorpe and a seconder. Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Thorpe, do you wish to speak to this motion? It don't have to? No, okay. All right. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors. The motion is carried. I advise that the council is now acting as a planning authority as at
6:28 p.m.
in accordance with the provisions of Part 2 Regulation 25 and the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015, the council will now act as a planning authority pursuant to the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. In accordance with Regulation 25, the council will act as a planning authority in respect to those matters appearing under item 10 on this agenda, inclusive of any supplementary items. It's also important to be aware that your role as a councillor and as a member of the planning authority are different. The key difference relates to decision making. As a member of the council, your decisions may be swayed by community feedback, but as a member of the planning authority, your decisions must be based on the provisions of the planning scheme. The above snippet from the Good Governance Guide makes it quite clear the importance of wearing, as we call it, our planning hats. Report number 10.003/25, change of use from residential to visitor accommodation at 38 Surveyors Bay Road, Surveyors Bay, VA 27/2024. I refer the councillors to the recommendation of this report. Do I have a councillor to move the motion?
Mayor, I'd like to move an alternative motion on this item.
All right, so we just, yep.
So that's been circulated by email to all staff with a minor update to the introduction to it. Thank you, Mr. Grimsey. And I can read that out if you'd like. So it is that A, the report be received and noted as recommended, and B, a permit be granted for the change of use to visitor accommodation at 38 Surveyors Bay Road, Surveyors Bay, CT 138660/12, BA 7/2024.
27.
There's an error in that.
Yeah.
27. It's just missing
BA27. Okay, BA27 2024. For pursuant to section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, subject to the following conditions. Can I delete the 4 between BA and pursuant?
Yes.
And so the 2 conditions there are, except as otherwise required by this permit, the use of the dwelling must be substantially in accordance with development application number VA 27 2024 and council plan reference numbers P1 floor plan, P1 building self-assessment form, P1 coastal erosion vulnerability assessment prepared by Geo-Environmental Solutions V1 dated 25/11/2024, all submitted on 2 December 2024 and endorsed to form part of this planning permit. This permit relates to the use of land or buildings irrespective of the applicant or subsequent occupants. This is condition 2. And whoever acts on it must comply with all conditions in this permit. Any amendment, variation or extension of this permit may require the further planning consent of the planning authority.
Right. Yeah, do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Burgess? Do you wish to speak to that motion now? Do we? Yep, do that first. Yep, okay.
And I recognise that we will need to, if it's successful, provide some reasons for this motion. So, and it's quite interesting and complex. So the first reason is that there's been advice from a suitably qualified person that the coastal erosion hazard category for the site should more correctly be categorised as medium. So the Geo-Environmental Solutions report identifies that the site is elevated significantly above water level and based on solid dolerite rock, which we know and trust is great and resistant to erosion. I did dig a little further into the State Planning Office's fact sheet on coastal erosion hazard bands, and the definition for high rating versus medium high is basically at imminent threat. And that fitted my understanding of much of the Surveyors Bay foreshore. I haven't dug holes there, but it looks much more like a sand dune sort of area, whereas this site is different to that. So I was comfortable that definition better met, like that it tested and met the medium category. Now, the second point there is that if it were categorised as medium, then use standard C10.5.1, which were the grounds used by Council's planner to recommend refusal, wouldn't actually apply. And checking a bit further, the use standard C10.5.2 for medium coastal erosion hazard bands also wouldn't apply on this site because it's actually an urban zone, which seems funny, but it's low density residential and that's lumped in the urban zones. I guess it's recognition of a greater value of that more intensive use. And it's a kind of residential, it's a valuable, human-centred use. So there's a fundamental question here about whether there's a pathway to recognise amendment of that different category. I believe that the words in performance criteria P1, having regard to, and then the advice contained in a coastal erosion hazard report, having regard to mandates that you're aware of, that you're informed by that report. So I believe the intent is to respond to any input raised from that report, which might be helpful to the application or might not be. even though this part of the SPPs doesn't explicitly say that there's a process or a capacity to amend or vary or recategorise, reclassify that rating or band category from high to medium. We also need to read the planning scheme as we would read legislation. So looking at the intent and the purpose of these criteria. So the use standards are that risk is managed and reduced. We can see the criteria for what would happen under a medium rating and see that would meet the performance criteria or not have relevant performance criteria. So if that were the actual rating, that would be an approvable proposal or application. And I think it's important, looking further at the mapping that's been used in development of our LPS, that coastal erosion band is a standard 35 metre depth all the way along Surveyors Bay. It's not being mapped accurately to site conditions. It's probably been done conservatively, I hope, so that we catch and address potential problems rather than let them slip through loopholes or slack mapping. And I can see that similar mapping approach in other aspects of the LPS and our planning scheme, in things like the 25 metre squares that are used to map landslide hazard risk. I think the intent of that mapping is to provide us a pathway to manage that risk if it exists. If it's proven not to exist, then I don't think that mapping is there to deliberately provide a constraint against development. So I'm looking at intent of the system, the SPPs and the LPS, and I think the intent is there to allow development that's not at some severe high risk. So those are my reasons.
Okay. Do I have any other comments on this? Yes.
I just have one through you, Mayor. So I think that makes a lot of sense in regard to changing what we can change to make things more appropriate to what we're actually viewing on a piece of paper. But in real terms, what would be the chances of us having more success with an application by going ahead with what Amy is suggesting as opposed to what legislation is saying? Like, can we just set a motion and then just have this approved going against, medium coastal bands or whatever it is that we're looking here? You know what I mean?
What's the risk?
Yeah, what's the risk?
Well,
Go.
yes, through you, Mayor. So to give a legal interpretation of the performance criteria in 10.5.1, I refer you to what is in the planner's report at page 37. You do not get to the having regard to if it is not for a use which relies upon a coastal location to fulfil its purpose. It must be that before you get to having regard to. Planning scheme specifically states that residential and visitor accommodation are not use classes that are reliant on a coastal location, which means you cannot then go to the having regard to. The high band is represented in the planning scheme in the LPS. To change that would require an amendment to the planning scheme. So and I will say personally, the way the planning scheme is drafted is resulting in what is a perverse outcome for an existing development. However, if you're looking at applying the planning scheme and the Land Use Planning Approvals Act, you are very limited in what you can do. The risks, you may not have a risk in the sense of if you were to issue a permit, you would still have my advice saying that you're acting outside the planning scheme and LUPA. and I'm putting that on the record. You may have a permit issued, you may not have any appeals to TASCAT, so the applicant might have a permit which they can go off and enact. That doesn't mean that the permit's valid for eternity, and if anybody wished to challenge that permit from an enforcement perspective, you could find in the future that that permit could be found to be invalid. I'd also just refer councillors generally to your code of conduct obligations in acting as a planning authority, not to take into account irrelevant matters. The other issue is reputational. This is equivalent, not being able to satisfy this criterion is equivalent to a prohibited development. So it's akin to approving a prohibited development. So I just need to give you that advice on the record.
So, thank you for that fairly detailed, what I didn't really want to hear. But I understand. Well, the frustration is, like the planning scheme is saying something other than what the recommendation on the report is saying, that it's a low risk coastal erosion. So why do we have trained professionals that are giving us reports that we then can't apply to a planning scheme because that is saying something else? So that's very difficult to work around something when you've got professionals giving you advice that's not the same as what you have to apply yourself to, but it isn't what you've got. And if we then rise above that, then we are actually going against our moral obligations as councillors. So why then should these people have to go and spend another few $1,000s to comply to something that the person next door or down the road's already complied to before this planning scheme came into effect? What happens if we just say, yes, we'll approve it? Do we get put in jail?
Through you, Mayor, I've just explained the risks.
Yeah.
Is it a code of conduct?
Yes, is it a code of conduct risk?
That is a risk, yes.
Oh.
Yes, councillor Jessup?
Yeah, look, this is a difficult one. Obviously, the path for a landholder would be to put in a planning, go to the Tas Planning Commission and ask for a scheme amendment, which from memory is 20 grand or something ish.
10.5.
Only 10.5. That's cheap at half the price. They have a report that it would appear as a fairly robust report conducted by a well-regarded organisation that I think we've used from time to time. So I have no problem with the report. Yeah, I suppose we have a path that at some point we're going to be doing plan amendments through the LUDS process and stuff. Don't we have a series of subsequent amendments to do at some point?
The next financial year, we're aiming to do scheme amendments, yes?
Yep.
Or LPS amendments.
Is just one that we throw in, but that's another issue. Had this person been informed during the LUDS process, they could have gone to the Tas Planning Commission with a report and said, Mr. Ramsey, please fix this silliness, as many people did with many of the overlays. And I think there's a broad recognition that many of the overlays that we're using are conceptual rather than factual, I suppose, to be blunt. Look, in my thinking about this, the base inequity of it is really frustrating for me, and planning is often inequitable. I note that, look, this person's done the right thing. I suspect there may be other people up and down that street who are renting their place out as a holiday let of some form without having informed us. And we've had this whole discussion around the rates about we actually want people to inform us so we can actually really understand what people are doing. So there's a further objective there. I note that there was no objections from neighbours, so it's not that the whole street's up in arms and this person's trying to do a swing around the back. As Amy said, I agree that there seems to be no imminent threat. There is no, in my view, significant impact on housing supply in the Huon Valley because it's probably a low likelihood rental anyway. And the counter to that, it actually desperately supports tourism, which we we know we need to support. So I'm inclined to run the gauntlet, to be honest. Let me say, if it was a new house to be built, given that we're talking about glaciers melting and sea level rising by 1.5 metres, blah, blah, look, I think we probably wouldn't be that keen, or if it was new development, we'd probably be looking at other applications. But it's a house that's there. The coastal inundation is only touches part of the property, from my understanding, or part of the dwelling.
Most of it.
That's most of it, yeah. Okay, so I retract that. But it's, and again, unlikely in the life of that house to be a major issue.
Thank you. Do I have any other? Yes.
I think, thank you, Mayor. A few months back, we had a development application before us that was just a few blocks up the road. Yeah, it was just the other end of the street. It was similarly complex, though with a different focus. It was inundation happening over there and its erosion hazard at this end of the beach. I guess in the previous application, why this application process was in the end fairly smooth forward and approved in the end was because there was also an historical context. There was an pre-existing building that then was extended onto. There would have been no way that a new building in this inundation overlay would have been approved that easily. So we did it because there was an historical context. Similar thing we could say about this building. It's been there for, I don't know exactly when it was built, but it's been there presumably for quite some time. Something else that I think on top of everything else, this area seems to be, is known as a shack area, right? So it was in its nature already temporarily used, maybe by the owners mainly, but it was still visitor accommodation in-house, right? Like for your own family. So now it's basically just opening the door for somebody else. I see this is basically what makes us want to approve it, where we see the unfairness on technical grounds to not approve it. The only concern that I have with it, just doing it, is that there is actually a technical pathway to get it done, which would be the planning scheme amendment, which is a costly and lengthy process that we don't want to put, on anybody ideally, but in the sense of procedural fairness, I think it would be the better thing to do. It's still a difficult decision by the end of the day, but I think that should be considered, that there is actually a pathway. I think something else that I picked up in reading the report was that if this area would have been an investigation area, erosion hazard investigation area, like for example the beach at Garden Island Sands, we would be able to take this report straight away right now without any planning scheme amendment, because this area there is classified as being investigated. So maybe a question in this regard is there a way that we can amend the planning scheme for this to be an area under investigation to then make the report be viable?
We're not going to be able to answer that on the spot, I suspect. But we can. Yeah, it's an interesting. It's an interesting maneuver.
And in that context, could we not? Because it is. You can be on the same beach, and the northern end of the beach will behave differently than the southern end of the beach. And this is just generally mapped as such a beach or such a risk at this particular beach. Wouldn't it be clever to say we put all our erosion hazard bands as investigation bands, or inundation mapping as investigation bands out? And then every development that is happening within this overlay will be basically contributing to informing what's actually happening in fact. And we bit by bit, build a little bit of data across stretches like that. It's just this example really shows that it's an existing house, and if anything, that it will be used. So there was another argument that Councillor Robertson put forward in the previous discussion, or in the discussion going ahead of the meeting, that, if anything, then there is less risk because there will be less people over less amount of time.
Well, I mean, what's being presented are rational arguments in juxtaposition to the technical problem that we have, where there just isn't a pathway to get to those rational arguments. And our advice stands, it's on the record, and that's complicated. That's also staff saw this problem. That's why we sought advice from the State Planning Office, people who drafted this stuff. We're hearing some excellent ideas on directions we can take, which we'll absolutely take forward. But it's not going to help us right here and now on making this particular decision.
So should we defer the motion? I know that's a pain for our own. What was that, Matt?
Time frame.
Sorry?
We have a statutory time frame,
Oh, do we?
And what is that, please?
42 days.
Can we write to the person asking the questions on that delay?
Sorry.
Amy?
To Lucas's, to Councillor Morosik's point, if this proposal were for an extension of 20% additional area onto the residents, it would be exempt from these provisions and approved. Just that's kind of how ridiculous some of the permutations of this are. So we've got a lower impact that I'm confident if you're in a flood zone and you're trying to use that valuable land and you put a caravan park or a motel as visitor accommodation there, we say that's a better idea than someone living there full time. So if there is, and there's medium erosion, coastal erosion risk. But yeah, technically we're not allowed to do it. And then the other comment I was going to make was we do keep seeing amendments to the SPPs in various ways. They are still relatively new as a set of rules for a statewide planning scheme. And we keep seeing tweaks to clarify or improve the utility of those rules. It may be that this is one of those areas that has not yet been addressed or identified by other councils. So if we are, and I guess that was one of my other questions, whether we attach it to the motion or whether we can just request and expect follow-up from staff to put that feedback up to the state formally to request a more adaptive approach to managing and categorising this risk.
Can I just ask, do we have representatives of this, do we have the owners in the room? If we could adjourn for a moment and just talk to the owners, given they're in the room, and talk about if we can seek an extension. It would need to be for 2 days after the next council meeting. So we could seek that extension right now, that consent for that. Adjourn briefly, have a discussion with the owners and give you that option. And that would give us the opportunity to explore what wriggle room we have in getting this into an investigation zone and working around that way.
If it was investigation, so Mayor, if it was an investigation zone, do you believe the planners would then follow the geotech advice and it would go through based on what you've seen? Well, we're just wasting time to knock it back in.
No, we don't want to waste time.
No, we don't want to waste time.
Yep.
What I can say is I feel like I'm reliving a past experience here, because what you just this narrative matches the narrative that was in the office. Because the reason we reached out to the SPO was because we saw this as a technicality rather than something that we have, as you've articulated, we had a report there that says this is a medium risk. So yes, the intent would be that if it was, we would take it at that report at face value, being a suitably qualified person that has provided it. But that's why we engaged SPO, and SPO came back and said we couldn't do that in the current context. The one concern I will say we have is if we do go down the investigation erosion, investigation sort of, which I think is a valid suggestion, that is still a scheme amendment. And that will need, that decision ultimately sits with the commission, it does not sit with us. So we would need to provide strategic justification, and would be beyond just a single property title, to present a strong argument in that reasoning. And I'm not saying we can't do that, but I'm saying that is a lot of work and it might go beyond a mere 42 days or whatever the extension would be in days. I'm just flagging that as a risk.
Yeah, we might, and that would be, we may need to seek that extension now and then provide further advice, which may be a further extension. To be clear, as Loz said, because it it'd give us at least the time to explore what is going to happen, and then work with the owners to achieve that, if it's possible.
So
We have an adjournment, have a chat.
there is, I've got,
Well, it's just,
Yeah.
it's an option. You guys can just consider it.
that's what I was just about to put out. Do we call adjournment and we talk about that? Or do you want to put your motion?
Councillor Burgess hasn't spoken.
Yeah, I'd like to push on with the motion as it is now. It'll send a strong message. It'll mean that we're serious, and then the staff can chase up if they want to change it later.
I'm not sure, from what I know of planning scheme processes, I suspect that a scheme amendment process would take longer than a state planning office clarifying the interpretation of the SPPs and making an amendment there. Maybe not, but I think both would probably take, at least 6 months.
So on that, we've flagged it as we think this needs to be considered in terms of their minor amendments that they make. So we've already actually taken that action. Whether they agree with us is another thing. So we could certainly come back with feedback on what their position would be in terms of that. But we have raised that with them.
I guess I'm relatively comfortable that the risk of this particular circumstance is okay, is bearable. And there was a question in correspondence during the week about whether this created a precedent for other houses along the beach. And my feeling is no, it doesn't, because it's still, we're relying on expert evidence. And if there are other shanks in high rating class that don't sit on dolerite above the tide mark, then an expert report's not going to nudge those
Well, you
into
can see
unsafe
that
treatment.
on the map, you can see how low they are, and they're right at sea level line, so it's quite different. It's unique. This one's unique.
And maybe that's why it should all be an investigation zone, because each of these areas are so unique.
Regardless of what you decide here on this, we will take that idea forward, because we're as you know, we're constantly exploring ways to nudge all this along in the right way.
So I guess I'm relatively happy to proceed. I'm relatively comfortable about the safety of it. And I guess the alternative, if it were refused, is that the applicant could go through that other process anyway to potentially change the owner.
The applicant could take it on appeal.
Oh, well, they could, yes.
They could, and they could take it on appeal and take it to TASCAT, where we could get a ruling on this. So we could present, we could look at it, and in that forum to determine whether the
weighting between the objectives of this code and the intricacies of different performance criteria.
They'd only rule on the interpretation of the law. They wouldn't rule on the overlay, though, would they?
Well, the
They
overlay is the
wouldn't change, but
interpretation, though.
no, how we use it.
They do
They
rule
wouldn't
on the
change.
intent. They do rule on the intent.
Okay.
If
Yeah, but that's only
there's
the law.
contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But none of us want to go to TASCAT, I suspect.
Well, I mean, going to TASCAT is actually it's not a bad thing to get. It's part of the process, and it's part of the it's there for a reason, and it
So
does
we're doing
give
it for
us
a higher moral reason, is that what you're saying,
some guidance. Sorry.
We're doing it for a higher moral reason, is that what you're saying? That we're going to pass this so we can go to TASCAT and prove our higher moral reason, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm the officer's recommendation stands, because that's the legal interpretation that we have, and we recommend you follow.
Okay, so Amy, what would you?
Like to proceed with the alternative motion.
Right, okay.
Yes, I was going to email you. I typed some more detailed reasons, but I'm happy with yours. Do we want to read them out? Are they part of the resolution? So I'll just read the couple of brief reasons. Advice has been provided from a suitably qualified person that the site should be correctly categorised as medium. definition of high is imminent threat, and this site is different to that. And second point, if the land were categorised as medium, then ground 10.5.1 would not apply, and C 10.5.2 would also not apply with the site.
So you're happy with it? You're not? What?
So a question, a point of clarification. So if we are to approve the amendment that Councillor Robertson's putting forward, it could also put at risk that if someone is to appeal or, contests this permit that we're granting, that could also be withdrawn from the applicant. Should somebody like to do that, should it be proved that it is not viable?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor, the permit could be challenged of its validity in the future.
So that's also a risk we're imposing onto the applicant as well by,
But it can only be challenged by parties with an interest, is that right from memory?
There's no amendments to Land Use Planning Approvals Act which restricts enforcement action to people with an interest.
Oh, there is none.
There is none.
Okay, so everybody can.
Everybody can.
But also realistically, these rules will probably change in 5 or 6 or 10 years, like they have done already from before. So, we're all talking hypothetical everything, really, aren't we? Like,
We're talking about what this.
Again, rational arguments and considerations of future hypotheses don't come into planning authority decisions.
So that's your, yep, okay. So if you're, yes, Lucas?
Yeah, I still struggle with it. As much as I'd like to say yes to the amended motion, I still would like to remind us that this performance criteria that we're talking about explicitly states that it needs to be, what was the term again?
Must be for a use which relies upon a coastal location.
And that's the thing that really trips it up. And the legal advice is just something that personally me scares me, enough to just be, uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
As much as my sentiment tells me, what's the big deal here? But, I see the danger that we just approve it despite the fact that there is a procedural pathway through a planning scheme amendment. And then somebody else will just get us back on not being procedurally fair. Somebody else comes along, another project somewhere else, and we feel compelled to act differently. And then we will, the whole discussion about why did we act like this here and why we act like this there. As much as I would like to leave some sentiment, and you know me probably as somebody who's very sentimental about many applications, I read not the paragraphs that much, but try to feel my way through it. And my feeling says me one thing, but the wording of the planning scheme is a little bit too
stupid.
Too black and white.
It is what it is, but it is very prescriptive, and that's what we have to look at, I think, primarily.
All right, okay, thank you, Lucas.
Quick tangent question. There are provisions for use in low or medium hazard bands that have the same reference to the advice in a coastal erosion hazard report. If a report on a low or medium band were to recommend classification of that as high risk, does that mean we'd similarly be stuck in the low or medium band and not able to shift it?
You'd have to look at the provision, but it may trigger a having regard to provision.
Yeah. So I think that's what would happen is that you'd have a pathway, but you would then have to have regard to that advice, which would then prevail and be to the detriment of that application, which would otherwise have a pathway through to completion. But it's an about face.
That's right.
All right, so if we're all had a look at it, and now we'll just put the
Sorry,
Yeah.
could I just ask one more question about this? So if we didn't have to apply, or if this DA didn't have to apply to any of this change of use, is there a category it would fall into where it would be able to be passed for visitor accommodation?
No, it's only to do with specific coastal activities. So if they wanted to do a boat lift there or something, they could possibly get approval for it. But
Yeah, but
nothing as benign as a house or a hotel. Yes, it already exists.
this is what I'm saying, like, could it be termed something else
Is there
and
another
still
way?
be legal?
Is there another way?
I'm sort of grasping at straws, you know, like.
We get you. Yeah.
Good try.
Thanks, Deb.
Look, again, just Lucas's point, and we've made our case, and we've said, you know, we've struggled with this as much as the councillors are now. It's mind-boggling. But consistency and good governance when it comes to planning is really key, and it's something that, you know, where this council is still haunted by past decisions in planning. It's still something that preoccupies me and the team, sometimes decades later. And that's the thing that really, gives me pause for concern, that we do the right thing, where, as has been pointed out, there is actually a pathway, notwithstanding that pathway is expensive.
You've been haunted by bad decisions.
Have you not been haunted by some bad decisions around here?
But you're implying that this is a bad decision.
Our recommendation is that we would not approve this, correct? So a motion to approve.
Therefore, it's a bad decision.
Correct, yeah. Notwithstanding it's a rational one, but in terms of Lupa,
Right.
yeah. I get the morals and all the rest of it, but yeah.
A really challenging one on our values of equity too, right? Because the planning scheme is not imposing an equitable treatment of this, but also to Councillor Morisak's point, it's like a double-edged sword. Then we're not being equitable in the right to process of other DAs that we may face.
It's very difficult to sit here and look at the applicant in the eye and continue to say what I need to say.
But why is it brought to us to make a decision if it's purely automated?
Oh, because they're throwing us under the bus.
That was a rhetorical question.
Don't you remember my little spiel at the very beginning for the?
Sorry, I was joking.
I absolutely adore a good system. Absolutely love, you know, great bureaucracy. But I also believe in challenging it when it's wrong.
Me too.
And I think here it's wrong.
Me too.
All right, well, we've had discussion, so I'm going to put all those in favour of Councillor Robinson's amendment to the motion, please raise your hand. That is Councillor Robinson, Jessup, Armstrong and Burgess. And against is myself and Councillor Morisak, and you're abstaining to vote. And so
It's recorded as against.
yeah, so that's recorded as against. Okay, so that means that the motion has been carried. So do we have to go back to? Do we have to go back to the original one? So that's been Amy's has succeeded.
Sorry about that, staff.
Yes, I am too, but I just.
We're on record.
So are we now, apparently. Like.
Record.
In my we'll be councillors. That'll be an interesting council, won't it? With 5 of us missing, 4 of us missing.
Thank you for the consideration of it though. Like
It's really hard. My moral compass won't let me. It just won't.
No, thank you for the staff advice.
Yes.
Good advice.
One day we'll find all those tweaks and fix them all and be out of a job.
one day.
So I advise that the council is no longer acting as a planning authority as at
7:09 p.m.
Thank you. So 11, you're going, yep, I'll let you go. Have a look as you go to the lift.
All right. I'm waiting for a surgeon to tell me whether he needs to have a go up or not.
Yeah, but have a look for yourself.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye.
No worries. Okay. Are there any councillors tabling their activities tonight?
Well, no, me. I haven't actually got any.
Thank you.
Oh, I had a meeting.
Everybody's got one.
Yeah, we had a meeting, yep. Okay, thank you. Yes,
May I speak to mine?
of the ones that are on your, that month's. activities?
No, we occasionally speak about more recent events.
Yep, all right. But I am going to stress to councillors that from here on in, it is so much easier to speak about the ones that you have done, not the ones that are going to be on your next month's activities. Because it confuses everyone when they look at your activities and you haven't actually been on what you're talking about. But you go ahead.
No, that's all right. That's
Yeah.
fair enough. I'll
Yeah.
comply with that.
Yeah, so I just
Love a good system.
Yes. Which I just think it makes it clearer for everybody.
Oh dear.
11.002/25. Do I have a councillor to move a motion that the general reports and minutes for the period 1 to 31 January 2025 be received and noted? Councillor Armstrong, and a seconder. Councillor Rozek. Do you wish to speak to the general reports or the minutes?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Do I have any? Yes, I'll go with councillor Thorpe first.
I have two comments in the general reports. The first one is, I can speak for myself, but I'm sure for all councillors past and now, welcome to new doctors joining us. I know there's a number of them in the report, so please do that. The second one is regards to childcare. I note that there's still waiting lists for childcare sessions. In particular, there was recently a mail out from state government that went out on consultation of a new child and learning centre, which doesn't necessarily imply any involvement of council or the intention I had that that's a place of a growing childcare centre. So I just wanted to clarify that and have an update on how that working relationship is happening with the state government and if our childcare services will be moving to that facility.
If our childcare service will be. The question is, I don't know. So clearly we advocated for a childcare centre through the election process, and what we have before us is one of 4 CFLCs that were allocated money. We are a stakeholder on that process. So we've been invited to participate, and we've certainly been engaging with the Department of Education for several months on this. While CFLC can incorporate childcare, it can also do a range of things, and ultimately the department's advice is that what it does and its focus is to be determined by the community. So we will be attending all of the public workshops, as well as working as a key stakeholder with the state government to continue to put the point forward that we have demonstrated and growing demand for genuine childcare services in the valley. That is where the key need is, and I'm yet to see a strong argument, and that's what will be discussed through the workshop process for the alternative features provided by a CFLC. And we've certainly had discussions about the needs in the valley, and it relates to many services here where the idea of outreach, given we already have a functioning CFLC out of Geeveston, and the challenge is people getting to our CFLCs. So do we actually need a central super CFLC, or do we need outreach that takes CFLC type services to the people, whilst we also have a childcare centre with a demonstrated need? So we'll continue to advocate for childcare.
So my intention is the announcement that the government made to commit to this was actually in response to council's advocacy for increased childcare services.
Yes.
But that's not necessarily guaranteed through the commitment so far.
No. And we've continued to prosecute exactly that argument, because that was what we asked for and that was our expectation.
So the public
But they
forum is
made-
saying a different thing.
Well, they made them child and family centres
Ultimately, the election commitment was
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
CFLC.
in
So we now
4.
we need to go through 4. Yeah, so there's 4. We have been working. We are in the first of the 2 to go, but we have to ultimately engage with that CFLC process to be led by communities' expectations and needs on what that CFLC will actually deliver. It's going to be an interesting process. But council will be turning up with the hard facts of the current demands, the growing demands, the growth in our municipality into the future, which continues to be strong, as well as design plans and cost estimates for a childcare facility on that site, which along the way we had identified and worked with the local schools to identify the opportunity to build on a childcare centre. So we'll come with all the evidence that we have, which is significant, of that need, and we'll see what the other needs are and how they can be met in cost-effective ways.
So we're more than show already, but for our section of that child family learning centre.
Come along to the workshop. It's on I think it's the 4th of March. I'll send you an invite.
Yes, was that your two? Was that?
Mayor, I'm assuming we're talking about 11.1 in this report, activities and highlights? Yep. So in the advocacy section, on the paper copy, page 24, the work you've been doing with forest practices, which I think is ex-councillor Chambers Smith said is a good thing. I've got an interest in rural activities, and in regard to particularly point 4, so I sat through the Planning Commission hearings here where John Ramsey on numerous occasions, the chair of the Planning Commission, said that the forest practices process is a separate pathway. It's alternate, it's not the same, it's different. And he chastised our staff occasionally on that when there's a forest plan in place, it's a different pathway. So just to be clear on my understanding of what an alternate pathway means, so let's take an instance that somebody's got an ag or rural zone block, they want to harvest some trees, plantation or native or whatever. They need to build a road to do that, which I believe the forest practice plan can approve.
So this is the forest practice plan on it?
No, they're applying, they're getting one. Yeah, so sorry, the forest practices plan would say approve clearing, build a road to get to clearing, and then repasture it, for example, or replant it as a plantation, whatever. So my understanding is that is process that is different to the LUPA process, and the LUPA process, we wouldn't be involved with that as council because it's a forest practices plan that's got its own accreditation, blah, blah. Full stop, we're not interested, we've got enough work to do. If, on the other hand, a year later, the owner says, I really like the view from the top of this road I've just built, I would like to now build a house. Obviously, they can't rely on the forest practices plan, which would have been signed off and finished by then. So they would then come back to us, put a DA in to build a house, which would probably trigger us reassessing the road because it's an alternate use, I suspect.
Right, yep.
Yeah, so that's how it works. So there is a clear separation, but obviously somebody can't then build a road under their forest practices plan and go, I'm going to build a dodgy house up here and get away with it because our compliance officer would knock on their door and tell them off.
Yes.
Okay, so a farmer can do farming stuff without having to get a DA to do stuff that is in that alternate pathway.
Yeah, that's contained on the FPP.
On the FPP, yeah. Matt looks uncertain.
Just to clarify, so we're assuming you're in a rural zone where your farming activity would be a
Mixed
resource,
forest,
yes,
yes,
which
yep.
would have either permitted as a right status or permitted.
Yeah.
But if it's permitted, you would still need to get yourself a permit.
Through
But in
the
most
forest
circumstances, no, the farming bit after it.
To repasture, if it's
Yes.
already.
Potentially. Most circumstances, they are no permit required.
So you'd have to go to council and say, I'm going to farm my farming land that's owned to be farming. Can you please tell me I don't need a permit? Yeah.
What we're going to, there's multiple permutations of this, hence the confusion and hence why we've gone to the FPA to work together, and this is still work in progress, work together to document exactly these kind of examples so that it's very clear to people how they can utilise their land to the maximum extent, which is what we want, and how they can do that in a lawful way. So we will be seeking through that education material to make examples like this very clear for what people
That
must
would be a
do.
great example to use. I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what people ask me, can I put pasture down on that paddock now?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool, I'll wait because I accept there's more to go. A couple of other things very quickly. NRM weed management, thanks, good report. I note that foxgloves are now a declared weed. So is that going to significantly increase the workload for our NRM staff? So I'll see a budget bid in that, will I then?
Well, it's through you, Mayor. We were talking about this today, and we're still trying to we're quantifying effectively what this looks like from a spatial extent, and then it's obviously going to be looking at it in terms of our resource haven't changed. We've just added on another weed into that zone A. However, there are sort of specific areas that it actually applies. It's not just council-wide as in the old days, for want of a better term. So we're still looking at what that means. But yes, the conversation was around how are we going to be supported in this space to actually carry out the objectives of this classification, because we don't want it to just be something that's on paper to appease sort of a group of people. It needs to be actionable, and it needs to be something that we can actually achieve to protect these areas, these protected areas and these wild areas. And I think that's not just us, because we only have one weed officer and they're only part-time.
And again, harping back to what I said last time about ragwort, I'd hate to see us prioritising that weed over a weed that impacts the economic conditions of the valley as well. So, but thank you for following up on that. I did hear back from the landholder that there'd been some work done on the ragwort in that road. Thank you. And also just with the quarterly report, thank you for that. That was a lovely report, and I encourage any ratepayer to have a look at it and just see what we've been doing for the last quarter.
Thank you. Hey, do I have any other?
No, thank you.
Do you wish to close then? No? No? Okay. Well, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. It's all councillors and the motion is carried. Councillor workshops, we have, yes, we've had one.
Yes, we have, and I'll leave it as read there.
Yep, as read.
Further to add.
Yep, no problems. 13.1, answers to questions taken on notice. There was 2 taken on notice from January's council meeting, and the responses have been included in the minutes. One was from Councillor Jessup and Councillor Armstrong. There was no councillor questions given on notice. Councillors, are there any questions tonight without notice? Yes, Councillor Armstrong?
One please, Mayor. So I was asked by somebody, I think the original plan for the Link Road did have some trees and flowers and whatnot.
We approved that.
Pardon?
We amended that.
Yep.
Yes, that's right. So would that still be going ahead and happening?
Yes, there would be planting, yes.
That's what it is, thank you. Because people are a bit concerned that nothing seems to be happening, but, these things do take a wee bit of time. But that was it. I did say that I thought it was still happening, but I just wanted to double check.
Yeah, it's the last part of any project when they get all the trucks out of there.
Yeah.
There aren't any plants going into the roundabout, so I know there's been community comment and concern about the plastic grass, and look, that's just a department striking a balance between maintenance costs and the maintenance of something like a roundabout on a highway is really significant, and work health and safety standards being what they are, to have people out there attending to vegetation, etc. The department's taken a view that that's just not a valid benefit, considering the costs. So yeah.
So no apple trees then?
There will be no apple trees.
No.
Sorry, thank you. And just.
We need to come up with other ways to beautify Huonville rather than rely on a roundabout. It's the simple thing.
No, that's it. I mean, and I actually thought that it might have just been so it didn't distract people from driving because there was nothing in the way to look at. So I just thought it was.
Look, it's the primary purpose is to maintain visibility and just provide a clean area. So I actually think they've done quite a good job. Yes, it'd be lovely if you could have plantings and all the rest of it, but the primary purpose of the roundabout is for safe traffic movement, not.
It is an unusual choice for a roundabout. I mean, sort of pavers. Look, I'm driving around and on it, so it doesn't bother me really. But also on that link road, do we have an estimation of opening time?
Through your mayor, we haven't got an opening time, and as you can imagine, the contractor is still finalizing the landscape design, and because as part of the planning condition, they are required to obtain council approval or to council satisfaction before they can actually finalize or plan the plans.
Yeah.
And that's part of their work. They probably have to complete before the road can be fully opened or fully commissioned. So it's still in progress. We don't have a certain set date or informed by the department in terms of when the link road will open. And also add to the discussion, the planning discussion is, yes, we're not gonna have the tree in the roundabout, but there's also requirements from the planning condition that have the tree along the first few houses to provide privacies and noise reduction. And also there's an environmental offset area is required by planning permit that the department needs to plan.
Excellent, thank you, Frank. So if you could just tell them to move that along a little bit, that would be great, because I'm sick of going around all the way.
No worries.
Straight ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, the Armstrong bypass. Oh no, not the Armstrong bypass.
It's a link road.
It's almost done. It's almost done, and it's just going to be so good when it's opened.
But you keep telling people it's
just
a
the
link.
frustration's getting a bit real, you know. Not with me, with people, but soon.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any other questions without notice? Yes.
I would have one that's just born out of the discussion that we just had about the DA. Say we as council were to instigate a planning scheme amendment. That's obviously something that the $10,000 that we're looking at, that's something that would have to be allocated in our budget for. So it's nothing that we can decide, presumably, say if I wanted to put in I won't be here next month, sorry, but if I were to put a motion in 2 months' time, would that be the pathway, and how do we align that then, for example, with our budget that's obviously already written or, set for the remainder of the financial year? Does that make sense?
I'd probably, you could do a motion. The alternative would be through our budget discussions and our strategic work plan, consider an allocation for next year. Given where we are in the year and what we've got remaining, it's unlikely that we'd be able to go and get the work done. I mean, depending on what you want to do, and we can talk about it offline. But that's the other pathway is just through our consideration of strategic planning priorities that we budget for. Put that through. Yeah. I think it's just coming up with what the priorities are for those type of. We've got. I mean, if we go down this avenue, the list of scheme amendments that we might like to progress is going to. Lyle's going to unroll the.
Maybe we get a discount.
The scroll.
If the more we have, you reckon? I think you're very optimistic.
Yeah. But look, I
writing.
really, I'm really proud of of support we're getting and the urgency, and sometimes like a little bit exhausted by you guys going, hurry up. But we should be proud of the focus that we've got on strategic planning now. So anything to continue down this path is a really good thing, and we see the real impacts here tonight.
but there's just so many of them out there. Prioritisation is going to be the key.
It's only because we're near the end of so much stuff and it's looking terribly exciting and it's been such a long wait. You just get a little bit impatient.
Close to the end though, Councillor Armstrong.
No, just one road. We're close to the end of one road. We're not close to the end of all the other bits and pieces.
Been a horrible kid.
And me, I was a horrible
So
child.
are you happy to then put that,
That's enough
put that in
information
writing?
for now. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Lovely.
I used to question things a lot.
Do we have any other questions?
No, thank you, Mayor.
No? All right. We'll move on to 13.4. There was one notice of motion for tonight's meeting from Councillor Robinson. Councillor Robinson, do you wish to move that motion?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, can you please read out your motion?
The doubling of application fees, and it's actually, I think, application and advertising fees for non-approved use or development already undertaken without prior LUPA approval be removed from council's fee schedule.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for Councillor Robinson's motion?
I'll second it to allow discussion, Mayor, not foreshadow anything else.
Councillor Jessup? Councillor Robinson, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, look, I've said that I love a good system. And to me, this is about making sure that our systems are clear, efficient, so there's an element of simplicity and accessibility, that they're accessible to our community, and that they're consistent. So in terms of planning fees, we've adopted some principles with other aspects of our fees and charges, such as our rates, where we treat those as a consistent obligation. So, for example, in our rates, for someone in hardship, we don't forgive that debt. We negotiate a different payment arrangement. And I think that's useful when it's a fee for service. The fee is the same for everybody. There will be circumstances where council might sponsor that fee because there's a project of community benefit, but it's consistent, and that's really important. To me, the service provided is assessment of a DA or a development application. That assessment, we've had discussions, it cannot be looking back and retrospective. It has to be looking forward at how that application is tested against the planning scheme for the future. So that's the service. Introducing ideas about cause for pre-commencement isn't part of the assessment of a DA. That's part of an enforcement approach for compliance. And we need to do that. We absolutely have to if we're going to have a system that works and that people participate in checking and meeting our planning scheme requirements, which is a brilliant idea, a definitely good idea. So if you're going to penalise someone, if you're going to apply extra cost for something they have done, then that's a process that's related to justice and the natural justice principles that are delivered through a compliance process. So those natural justice aspects aren't necessarily going to be available or demanded to someone when they're putting in an application for a DA. That application isn't necessarily going to say, oh, actually it was the previous owner who built that shed that I'm now applying for permission for. It's not necessarily going to say, I'm going to struggle to pay a doubled fee because of family hardship circumstances. Those aspects of natural justice, and they include bias. And that's natural justice and our justice system has an ability to manage bias, and it's actual bias, but it's also perceived bias. If bias or your situation or case is being assessed by the same person who's also going to consider your permit application, there's a perception of bias there. And I'm pretty confident that there probably isn't any actual bias, but it's a perception thing. And people tend to feel more comfortable talking about or addressing past non-conformance with someone who's independent from future consequences on their matters. So that's why we have a compliance pathway that in many aspects is separate. Now, there's a parallel, which is that we all pay a fee for service through our taxes and so forth in the funding that we need to provide a police force. That police force will generate some revenue when it issues speeding tickets. And it's lovely if that revenue can cover the cost of the personnel and equipment that's managing that program, that helps ensure there's a disincentive to drive over the limit. But in council, so in council, I'm advocating that consideration of past performance and issues of non-performance in getting approval before you start something that needs a DA, that's addressed through our compliance system. We have a pathway, we have a capacity to issue fines or take people to court and to manage variations to that where there is hardship or reasons or liability on that. So that's what I'm advocating for, that those issues are dealt with in the right pathway, in the right part of the system that's designed to address those.
All right, thank you, Amy. Is there any questions for?
I've just got one question for Councillor Robertson. So you were advocating that we still charge them the single proper rate, but then chase it up and try and fine them, basically, through compliance.
I'm advocating that any non-compliance, we've had discussions on non-compliance in council, and that any non-compliance needs to be dealt with. We don't gloss over any of that. We have to accept that we have responsibilities in that. And so that is dealt with by the compliance part of our organisation, which has a different focus and it is more, it certainly needs to communicate and understand what intent there is in terms of people getting a pre-commenced project through an actual approval process so that it is legal. But there's a more specialist approach to this area in that part, those roles, that part of the organisation. That deals with, there's a whole proper process set up for that. There's things too like, and we have that in many aspects of our society. So you know when you get a speeding ticket and you have the notice and it has a pathway to say, were you the driver or was it someone else? And so you know that there is a process and a capacity to appeal that if on face value it's not correct. I recognise that we've got a policy that allows us to waive or adapt our fees, to exercise some discretion on the principle of doubling the fee. But I think our fee structure is actually better when it's more definite. And you need that flexibility, but we need to not be using that a lot. If we're using flexibility a lot, it says to me the system's not actually designed well.
So essentially, is this basically trying to, so retrospective DAs, which are confusing, we've had a few of them, trying to move a retrospective DA and putting that into the compliance team, or through a compliance process rather than a planning process?
No, the DA stays within planning.
Yeah.
But the consideration of any work prior to lodging the DA or indeed approval of the DA gets dealt with through compliance. And it's going to end up there if the DA isn't approved in any case. So that's my argument, that compliance should have some sight on those situations.
Yes, Councillor Chisholm?
Mayor, so the flowchart on page 52, going along the top line, applicant declines to voluntarily amend the application. So I'm assuming if somebody doesn't have an application in, we ping them and they quickly put an application in, is that a double fee?
No, so that's what we're trying to do here. So sorry.
No's a good start. So there is a pathway for people to fess up, get on with it and stuff. By the look of this second box, it says when the applicant declines to voluntarily amend, that's when we're to go down a compliance path or a double jeopardy fee path. Is that how it works?
It'll go down a compliance path, and if it ultimately comes back into a DA land, it could wear that outcome. I'd just draw your attention to the first step of an enforcement order is to actually instruct the respondent to make an application for approval. So even when it goes into the compliance pathway where we say, look, forget your DA, there's this stuff, you're not voluntarily complying, and we've got these things that are difficult, the first step is we actually try to support the applicant we're not interested in fining, we're interested in getting them to regularise.
So would that be a single fee application at that point?
Potentially, because we have our fee waiver thing. So even if it's gone down that path and we've had to have enforcement get involved, but then we've swiftly got, okay, yeah, no, I understand now, and I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to voluntarily fess up to all my things, we then have the discretion, just like someone who immediately does it.
And what would you largely do? Would you largely use that discretion and just tell them to get on with it and single fee?
We are interested in getting people to have compliant uses of their land, and so we would apply the discretion.
Okay, I just say good not answer, but you did answer. So if we then go into a compliance pathway and they get fined their $3,000 or their $15,000 or $13,000, depending if they're corporate or citizen, then we will say you still have to put in a DA, and we are definitely going to charge you double because we're.
At that point, we have it's a cost recovery of the significant administration that we have between multiple parts of council, sharing information, trying to support the compliance activity.
Potentially isn't covered under the compliance fee of $3,000 is essentially what you, because for me there's a bit of a sort of what box is paying for what. So if we're finding people, maybe the fine should pay for that. If we're approving the application, maybe the fee should pay for that. But as they get complicated, it is there. And look, I do think there is more work because they generally come to us and we spend an hour and the staff have written a report and there's been 10 people go out to look at it. Including some councillors with their tape measures. So I think there are extra costs. I don't like it being called retrospective, but I don't know what you call it, a naughty fee. But this is a service fee and we are saying that there's more work to do, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, should we double the advertising fee as well as the application fee? So that's just a technical issue that we're probably being a bit cheeky if we're not having to double it twice and advertise it more. But I think the other issue for me is all of these fines and penalties and risk of additional costs have a general deterrence effect. And that's, our whole law is based on a general deterrence effect. If you do something wrong, you'll go to jail. So I certainly get very frustrated when people go down the wrong, deliberately sometimes go down the wrong path. They get fined $13,000, they might have made even more money out of whatever they did, and they thumb their nose at the process. I don't like that. But I also get very frustrated with the one that we had last year where there was $70,000 worth of reports and it went round and round and they were trying to build a house and okay, they did the wrong thing, but they did fess up and try to do the right thing. So I I would rather it not be called retrospective, but I would certainly encourage council to use discretion to support people to do the right thing. And yeah, if there is a deterrent effect that needs to be issued, that's your job to issue it too.
It's not in the report, but the director responded to Councillor Robinson's questions this afternoon to say that the retrospective fee has been applied 36 times only since 2022. So that's 3% of the planning applications we achieve. We don't have stats on how many times we've exercised the discretion on it. It's just not something we've been tracking, and we will start. We should.
I would suggest that there'd be more than 33 applications where people started things before they put the planning application in.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. So we are satisfied that it's effective, it's working, and this is the simplest way to do it.
So basically, if people work with council, council will work with them. If people don't work with council, they will cop the wrath.
We want voluntary compliance, and that's what we promote through the compliance process as well as the planning process. But when we start incurring costs from refusal to work with us and refusal to do the right thing, then we have no choice but to continue, and that ultimately is costing all ratepayers when we're engaging with
Well, that's
someone
correct.
recalcitrant.
And I think that's a thing to remember, you know, when you have to chase people, that's resources.
It's not council's money, it's
That's right, it's ratepayers' money, that's exactly right, but it's a lot of time, a lot of work.
And I suspect if a person's done the wrong thing once and been oppositional, I suspect we probably spend more time monitoring the progress of the work over time, which is an additional cost in staffing.
Yeah.
Can the name, Matt? Sorry.
Planning compliance fee.
That's the thing. So it's called a planning compliance fee, is what it is actually called. The common nomenclature, and it historically was called a retrospective fee. We've changed that name. It's a planning compliance fee. Yes, and I did say that in the report here, that's been the common parlance. I've haven't seen. I think people know what retrospective generally means, which is why it was used. It's now causing an issue. So yes, we need to move away from that language.
Compliance fee is more pointed.
Correct. Planning compliance fee. Yep.
Back to where we're up to. If we don't have any other questions for Amy, do you wish to close on your motion, Amy?
So I'm interested in the feedback that we're hearing around the table. And I guess if the motion were unlikely to be supported in its entirety, and I'm approaching this not as an advocate for, there's a small percentage of the population who may well deliberately do the wrong thing and continue those endeavours. But there's a bigger portion of that 3%, so maybe it's not a huge issue in the scheme of things, but there's a bigger proportion that are people who find themselves in this situation accidentally. And maybe it's people who've bought a property where there's a legacy issue that they weren't aware of. Maybe it's people who've come from interstate and assume that the rules of this planning scheme are similar to whatever scheme existed in their home or their original space in terms of how to put up a shed or something. And so it's those people it's the pub test and those people and those perceptions that I'm concerned about, because I don't want there to be barriers to participation in our system. And I guess that's what I see as a risk from the double fee. There's already so much cost to going through the complicated planning scheme approval process. How do we make that easier, simpler, more accessible? We want people engaging with it.
I think that's what we're trying to demonstrate with the stats, though, that yes, there are people that have bought properties that have unwittingly have non-compliances on their property, and we have the avenue and we are assisting them and avoiding that fee where we are promoting compliance.
So can we find a short set of words that allow people in that situation to also access those elements of natural justice and understand that they do have a pathway to say, actually, I don't think I should have to pay the whole fee because really I'm trying to do the right thing now, and I'm sorry.
I don't think they are though. I think if they're sort of complying, they're not being charged twice anyway. If they're making an effort to begin, is that how it would normally work? They're not fined.
Is it are you seeking a statement through our, enforcement policy or?
More when you invoice someone for their application fee, and if it's a double fee, and maybe we need to take off the advertising cost from that. Maybe it just needs to be double application fee.
So for clarity, it's if someone submits a DA for something that's not approved, you pay double the applicable planning fees than what you would pay if you were getting the approval.
Typically what happens is someone submits an application and they pay a DA fee.
Yeah.
Our planners then look at the property, they start to assess the application they've got in front of them, and they identify that, what's going on here? You have some non-compliant development already in place. Please explain, because we have to. At that point, we then seek to work with that person and we explain that if you've got your two avenues here, so we work with them and say, we want you to withdraw the application, make it whole with all this stuff, and we'll support you to do that. And in that case, if you're working with us, it just becomes an application, as we've said. It's not retrospective. Yes, the stuff exists, but we just assess it as an assessment. So we push them down that path. If there's resistance that then creates that whole administrative burden, whatever else, then we have the avenue to apply that fee, but all the way through it, we have discretion to go, you are helping, you are minimising our administrative costs, and we won't apply that fee.
So in this instance, you made the comment that it's working. Is it reducing? Because I think also a compliance in other areas where it's needed works when there's less strain. That working and reducing strain on other areas that actually require a compliance action.
Well, I mean, that's a separate side of it, but building compliance is an area which is very challenging to recruit for. We've only recently got a building compliance officer back on, same with planning compliance, challenging to actually find people that can do these jobs for us. They have a whole avenue of other work. They're fully gainfully employed, and we could certainly employ more of them to give it a hurry along. Requiring compliance to take the lead just adds unnecessary work to what they're already doing. And as I've already pointed out, the first step that they do anyway is to seek voluntary compliance and just try to push it straight back in, which is the path of least resistance back into planning. So it's just we're spinning our wheels on this.
Yeah, I don't really understand the motivation, to be completely honest, of the motion.
Yeah, I think what Councillor Robertson tries to kind of get rid of is the maybe perceived impression of us double dipping. If I, can use this term, like once going down the compliance path and charge them those $3,000 for an individual because they haven't complied, and then they go into the application process and then are burdened with double the application fee because they created a fact before the application. So from that perspective, I get that, but I think we've heard enough explanation, and I'm personally satisfied, to go with it. That says there is a compliance element to it, and the costs the costs for the person who didn't comply are covering the compliance process. And then we're going into the development application process, and as we have heard from Lockie, there is, like, if people comply and they're happy to kind of pull their records straight, then they will not pay this double fee, and it is to council's discretion to not apply it. And if there is, I'm pretty sure nobody will apply this fee if somebody is compliant and goes down this path voluntarily. If people say, no, I don't want to hear it, fair enough. If that's costing us more, and compliance is, already had happened, they're already been paid and they got their job done. But now it's planning who's got to take the extra burden because there's somebody, even after being pointed out to be better be compliant, they still refuse. I don't see why we should not. Maybe it doesn't have to be the double fee. Maybe that's, just doubling it maybe makes it too simple. But if it's, I don't know how much of the money we actually really need. But anyway, long story short, I personally feel satisfied that this is actually an okay way to go because it's two different things. One is compliant and the other one is planning. And if somebody is not compliant within planning, then I think it is quite okay to impose a planning compliance fee.
I just had a point of clarification as well to Councillor Jessup's question before. The advertising fee is not doubled, it's just the assessment fee.
And then you can rebate some of that back anyway. Because it sounds like you don't always charge double.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think the director said we waived 75% of one just last week or something. So they're a regular thing, we're regularly doing it. Yeah.
I'm glad you're not doubling the advertising fee.
Okay.
It's the compliance cost of that assessment is what that fee is about.
So what I might do then is put this to the vote.
There's some nuance that's come out through the discussion that that I'm encouraged to hear. So I might, well, I might feel comfortable withdrawing the motion. And I've made some points about the clear communication to applicants. And there's been a clarification on doubling the advertisement fee. So that was my reading of it. So that's great if that's not doubled.
So do you want to withdraw or do you want to proceed?
I'll withdraw it.
Okay.
I'm happy with that as a seconder.
Can I make a suggestion? I get the point Councillor Robinson's making around natural justice. There's one, and I hope I'm not going out of order here, but there's one way we could capture that in the policy under that fee waiver clause. We could articulate those natural justice considerations in applying the fee waiver. So just sort of broaden that policy just to be clear on those natural justice elements.
And it might be that if we can find the right words in a sentence that goes through to the whatever the invoicing system is for that category of fee or something like that's building connection and awareness through the system of our policy and its intent and how it is received by Joe Public on a bit of paper with a dollar figure on it that feels daunting.
Right. Thank you. Okay. So that's withdrawn. Fine with that. Okay, we'll move on. Report number 15.005/25, proposed policy, nature strip and road reserve policy. I refer the councillors to the recommendation of this report. Go on, Councillor to move the motion, please. Councillor Jessup and a seconder. Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Jessup, do you wish to speak to this?
Just briefly, Mayor, you'll be happy to know. Look, I think we've talked about it a few times. It's been amended by everybody. Look, we're never going to get this 100% right in terms of fees. I notice there's people saying they don't want to have to do landscape fees, but then there's a comment saying draw a sketch with some names and some plants on it. So as people get used to it, they'll use it. I'm personally uncomfortable about people who try to make their pretty grotty looking nature strips look neater, and then we go around and knock on their door and tell them that they shouldn't have done things if we haven't given them guidance on what to do in the first place. So this is a good way of giving people guidance. It's a good way of encouraging people. Yeah, I know Councillor Burgess takes great pride in the awards that Geeveston gets for having a beautiful township, and I'd like the whole valley to beautify their nature strips and stuff like that. It's a wildlife habitat for bugs and insects and all sorts of things. So I think this codifies it and makes it simple. I'm encouraged that we get on with it and get it done.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Robinson.
I appreciate the consultation and the feedback that came through that. I remain concerned about the requirement for permits, and in particular the council's response to rep number 3 to me shows a distrust of the majority of our community that try to do the right thing. I think compliance needs to be based on telling people your expectations and assuming or even recognising and rewarding in Geeveston where people do the right thing and do an awesome job. So this perception that to simply allow for plantings to occur will mean that the council will become involved in retroactive enforcement action and be led into potential disputes with property owners as to whether the works do or do not comply, or indeed would have been permitted in the first instance. And I note that Hobart City Council's policy says residents wishing to alter a nature strip will not need to seek approval from the City of Hobart to landscape a grassed nature strip as long as the requirements detailed in this document are met. That's the kind of cooperative, more trusting relationship that I'd like to see demonstrated in this policy area in the Huon Valley. We have a value about working in partnership with our community, and that's the direction that I'd like to see this policy go more in.
So what are you saying, Amy? That
I'm not comfortable with the core structure of the policy that requires an application and a permit,
No worries.
even at low cost.
Yep. Thank you for that.
An amendment to change that part?
I always like to make things better, Mark, but in this instance, it would be a really substantial amendment to the policy, and I've already said enough tonight. I'm running out of steam, so I'm just going to have to leave it there.
Okay, thank you.
We'll review it.
All right. So, yeah.
I think 4 years. If we had the opportunity to amend the motion to approve the policy and review it in 12 months' time, and that. So that I think would be, and it's a new policy area, so I think that would be a useful step in the review process to say, how did the first 12 months of implementation go? What did we learn?
But we can do that, but we can request that anyway. So I think that's just doing something that we can already do.
Take that as read.
Yes,
Yep.
Frank.
Through the mayor, Councillor, when you mentioned the Hobart City Council, the natural strip policy, I was reading their policy says alternative natural strip planting and treatment. A resident wishing to replace the grass verge with low maintenance planting or garden areas must apply in writing to the council and received written approval prior to undertaking any works. So I wonder what policy or guidelines you're referring to.
And I think we did use some.
Well, I mean, regardless of Hobart's environment is, it's different. It's largely curb and channel with structured footpaths on both sides of the road because they are much more urbanised. We don't have that, so there's a really real risk of us getting drawn into people go and do a beautiful thing, but obstruct the nature strip, prevent people walking on it, all sorts of things. It's a different environment, and what we don't want to be doing is having to run around and validate that things are right. We think that it's reasonable at a low cost for people to reach out and actually tell us what they're doing and get some consent to do that. And as we've just agreed to do, we will review this after a year and see how it's working.
All right. Any other? Okay, Councillor Jessup? No?
No, I'm happy.
Well, I'll put that forward. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's Councillor Thorpe, Armstrong, Jessup, Burgess, Rozak and Doyle. And against is Councillor Robertson. So that has been one and motion is carried. Report number 15.006/25, lease of public land, Cygnet Town Hall. I refer the councillors to the recommendation of this report. Do I have a councillor to move the motion? Councillor Rozak, and a seconder? Councillor Armstrong. Do you wish to speak to this motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Certainly an interesting reading the report and the expression of interest submissions. having had some discussions at the last workshop about the whole review and how this is all going to go into the future, I think it makes sense that we actually do not act on this EOI at the moment as recommended, because it really does seem like, despite the fact that Space to Coast seems to be not, as effectively working as we would wish it to, it seems like it will ultimately allow all the groups that put an EOI in to use the space in the most flexible manner for everybody involved. So, I think, so I'm happy to go with the recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions on this, or?
Just let me peruse that again. I read it last night. I'll peruse it again.
Can we just confirm, I think Dr.
Oh,
Smith
this is
asked
about
this
the
comment
petition.
as well.
Yeah, we haven't seen hers.
Can we just make sure that it was included through the creation of the recommendation? It just didn't make it to the attachment.
Yep.
Brandon.
I've been trying to find it here because I know I've read it, and it was again, it was in accord with what we've with what Dr. Smith placed on behalf of the Living History Museum. So we have, it's definitely been considered, and we'll just need to, I don't know how to amend it.
It's in ECM. It's a little bit difficult to retrospectively put it in now.
Yeah.
But we can acknowledge it publicly that it's there.
Yeah.
I did find it did not come to the legal PA box, which was the correct one to come to.
The content in it wouldn't change the recommendation, and it's.
Expected submission.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, but
Make sure it was read and.
yeah.
So sorry, could I just ask you to repeat, councillor, what you just said? About
Play the recording.
Sorry, I was reading something else and I was half listening, but I've lost focus for a minute.
Myself. No, I think reading the submissions, part of this report, it became apparent that actually the preferred way of using the hall would not be awarding those EIOs to those individual applicants, as that would somewhat constrain the wider community to participate or to use the hall in the way that we would like to see it used. So once the Space to Coast system is fully operational and rid of all flaws, it should be actually much easier for everybody, regardless who they are, if they are an individual or a community group, just to go on, pick their day, pick their time, and just book this thing, rather than rewarding those rooms to those individual organizations who are, most of them, not even using the rooms all the time, every day. So there would be potential increase of use possible if we do not reward those individual EOIs. And so I personally, in my opinion, it's a good idea to not act on those EOIs and rather in accordance with, in line with the whole review and the motion that was presented by Dr. Smith at the December AGM, to rather open it up to the wider community through the Space to Go.
I agree. I thought that's what you were saying, but I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
I'm glad that I could pull it off again.
It's just
Do I have any other questions or no? After repeating, do you want to close?
No.
Well, I'll put that motion.
Oh, I could do that.
All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present, and the motion is carried.
Beautifully explained.
Okay. Report number 15.007/25, lease of the Weybridge Cottage. I refer councillors to the recommendation. Do I have a councillor to move a motion? Councillor Armstrong, and a seconder. Councillor Robertson. Do you wish to speak to this one, councillor?
Yes, just briefly, Mayor, did we have a conversation about the state of this cottage?
12 months ago. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And we comment on that in the discussion that 25 and 26. So at that time, there has been interest in refurbishing the cottage to do more than just for more than a use of just as a storage space. That idea is still there, but there hasn't been progress on the designs that were being put forward by community members. So this is a rollover for another 12 months. That option is still there at the discretion of any potential lessee to bring that forward for us to consider. It's heritage and those type of concerns and the well, it's just as soon as the risk is if you touch that building to try to make it more usable, you quickly lose the building.
It's also tiny.
It's So if there's community interest in upgrading that, but it hasn't come forward in this 12 months, so roll it over.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions or... No? Okay, well, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present and the motion is carried. Report number 15.008/25, Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy, Urban Growth Boundary Proposed Update. Do I have a councillor to move the motion, please? Councillor Armstrong, and seconded Councillor Jessup. Do you wish to speak to this one?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any other comments on this one?
Mayor, so timeline for a submission? Did we? So part B says a submission will be made. I'm assuming there's a date. Isn't there quite a tight date on this? Matt? Yeah, so we'll get the submission distributed to us.
Submission is included as the attachment.
Yes, okay. Yep, no, I did read that. Yep. So I've missed the chance to make any comments on that, so we'll move forward.
Do I have any other comments?
No, not for me.
No?
It does, it just reflects a very strange process going on in planning again. Yeah, and I think it's so I thought this was more an explanatory note rather than a submission, but I agree with what we're saying in the submission, but we need to stand up to being good, basically.
All right, thank you. You don't wish to close, Councillor?
No, thank you, Mayor.
No, well, I'll put that, all those in favour, please raise your hand. That's councillors less Councillor Thorpe who left the room. Thank you. Report number 16.003/25, Finance Report, January 2025. Do I have a councillor to move the motion? Okay, Councillor Burgess and Councillor Jessup. I'll give you another rest, Deb.
Thanks.
Councillor Burgess.
I just commented that it's a very thorough report and it looks good for council.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions or?
I think the fact that we haven't got much to say says heaps, really. Doesn't it? Because it's all just moving along.
Yes.
I'm not convinced that interest rates are going to drop terribly quickly. I'm pretty sure they're not. So I'm assuming our forecast, it's probably not going to have much of an effect between now and July anyway, any decline in interest rates, because most of our TDs are locked in, I think.
Can we pass that one through to you?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. We factored in some decreases in the interest in terms of setting the interest budget when we did that. To be honest, we probably expected more interest rate drops than what we've had. So I think we'll probably be fine with that amount at this point in time.
Wishful thinking.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. All right. don't have any other? No? Councillor Burgess, you don't?
No, it's just good to notice that we're actually using Bendigo Bank again, our local Bendigo Bank, which is good to see. And that's it.
Would you like to comment on
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on that through you, Mayor, that we've been having quite a few discussions with Bendigo Bank to try and get better rates as well. I'm pleased to say that they've come to the party a little bit, so that makes the decision much easier for us to make in line with our investment policy.
Very good.
Thank you. All right. I'll put that motion then. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors, and that's for the finance report. You've walked back in?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, it's all councillors, thank you. Yep.
I didn't know which report we're up to.
Yeah, no, I know.
We'll tell you what jobs are after you.
Okay, we're up to 19.007/25. As we're about to move into closed council, so I'd like to thank you and you for hanging in with us tonight, and those at home that are watching. The recommendation is that the meeting now be closed to the public at pursuant to Regulation 15 of the Meeting Procedures Regulations to discuss the following: confirmation of minutes, general reports closed, expression of interest for Mary Street portion of the Cygnet Town Hall, outstanding accounts, and the Geefton Town Hall Controlling Authority. Do I have a councillor to move a motion to go into closed? Councillor Robertson and Councillor Burgess. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors. I advise that in accordance with the Yawn Valley audio recording of council meeting policy, recording of the open session of the meeting ceased at
8:17 p.m.